Thank you everyone for being here. My name is Lauren Williams. I am Adult and Community Services Manager for the Columbia Public Library, which is part of the Daniel Boone Regional Library System. And we are here this evening for tonight's program, Stories of Service from Returned Peace Corps Volunteers. And before I have tonight's panelists introduce themselves, I want to go over a few Zoom housekeeping items. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, if you hover or tap, you should see, among other things, a hand icon and a chat bubble icon. There are two ways to ask questions at the end of this presentation. Everyone's microphones are muted now, but if you want to ask a question, once we get to the question and answer portion of tonight's event, you are welcome to click that little raise hand icon and I will ask you to unmute and you can ask your question. Or if you'd rather type your question in the chat, go ahead and click that chat bubble and type your question in there. And we will be keeping an eye on those questions so we can ask them at the end of the presentation. So tonight's program is co-sponsored by the Central Missouri Returned Peace Corps Volunteers. And I'd like to turn things over now to Trevor Harris, the Peace Corps Campus Strategic Recruiter at the University of Missouri and Returned Volunteer, Zambia, 2008-2010. So take it away, Trevor.
Lauren, thank you very much. And thank you everybody for taking some time out on this beautiful spring evening to spend some time with us. As Lauren said, my name is Trevor Harris, and I have taken the lead in organizing this panel that has been a panel that has happened in years past. The stories from Peace Corps volunteers are popular and are interesting to share, and it's a way that we can illuminate what Peace Corps is. And just at the start, I want to say that while this is called a Return Peace Corps Volunteer Panel, I think that it's about the idea of international service. And it's about just the notion that if you want to be contribute to the greater good, and you can do that locally, you can do that internationally. This happens to be a group of people on the panel this evening that have all been Peace Corps volunteers, but there are many other ways to serve internationally. Lauren, can we go to the next slide, please? For those who know, excuse me for the next minute. For those who don't know, the Peace Corps is an opportunity for trained Americans to serve in a developing country. We go for a period of 27 months, and the Peace Corps has been around since 1961. It was started by John F. Kennedy as a campaign promise, and it was a way to extend the skills of Americans and of America to the developing world. And this was early in the Cold War. So Kennedy was interested in getting Americans out there, see and be seen, and just mingle with people and do good projects in the process. Since 1961, about 240,000 Americans have served in the Peace Corps, and that includes the 8,000 who were evacuated 1 year ago. So it was in March of 2020 when the world shut down. That included the Peace Corps. Those 8,000 were evacuated. Then a few stayed, but most came back to the United States or brought back to the United States. And it's those 8,000 that will have the first opportunity to serve in a new domestic program that is related to COVID response. And those 8,000 will have the first opportunity to serve when new positions reopen. So Peace Corps is reopening each country as they feel it's safe to do so and send volunteers back into the field. Volunteers work in one of 6 sectors. I was an a blended ag and environment volunteer in 2008 to 2010. I served with my wife, Lisa, who's in one of these other boxes here, and you're going to hear from her in a few minutes. And we had wanted to do Peace Corps, individually. We thought about it for years. I had grown up and went to just grew up in a community of service, and there was people just helped one another. When I went to high school, my Catholic high school had a service requirement. You had to do 100 hours of service before you could graduate. So it was just kind of ingrained in me. This is something that you do. You help other people. And when I was done with college, I knew I wanted to go and serve abroad. I just had a few other things I had to do first. So it was about 15 years after I had graduated from MU that I became a Peace Corps volunteer in Zambia. Now, next slide, please. In brief, what's Peace Corps about? We'll talk about it on the very micro level in a minute here about what individual volunteers did, why they did it, and why it still matters to them. The mission of Peace Corps is promote world peace and friendship by fulfilling 3 goals. The first was at the core of why Kennedy and Sergeant Shriver created the Peace Corps, and that was to help people in interested countries meet their need for trained men and women. Peace Corps doesn't go anywhere where we're not invited, where they haven't said, yeah, come and bring your advisors. And those countries each pick which of the 6 sectors in which they would like to get volunteers. The second goal is promote a better understanding of Americans on the part of people served. Lisa can speak to this when it's her turn on the panel here. Um, but I felt like a lot of times I was the only American that many Zambians had ever met. But they had a lot of images from TV and media about what America was like. So you go and you meet people and you can dispel myths about what America's like. I might have had some myths about what Zambians were like. So you just have this one-on-one exchange. The third goal of the Peace Corps, we're doing it right now. That is promote a better understanding of other peoples on the part of Americans. So that's what I want to get to now is those stories, because I think that's the best way to tell the story or just explain what Peace Corps is here's some stories of people who have lived that life. So the first on the panel is a professor at Columbia College, and I know Nathan Means because he has been generous and opened his classrooms to me for several semesters now to talk as the Peace Corps recruiter. I work as the recruiter at the University of Missouri, but that also includes Mid-Missouri. So we'll talk to anybody, and that includes, young school groups all the way up to retiree groups, and there's a lot of classroom groups in between. So I want to let the return volunteers each have their time to share some slides, and then they'll introduce each other. And at the end of that time, there'll be an opportunity for Q&A, and we can either do it live, you can ask to be unmuted, or you can put it in the chat. So Nate, it's your time to tell us about your volunteer experience in Guatemala.
Perfect. Thank you, Trevor. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. Let's see, I'll give a kind of a brief introduction to who I am since we got loads of time. I was born and raised in Columbia, Missouri. Grew up here. My father was actually in the military, and then he retired and we ended up here. Then I went to college in Springfield, Missouri at Southwest Missouri State University. I got a degree in biology. But when I got done, didn't know what I wanted to do. The job market was not particularly good. And, with my father's kind of career in the military, I was like, maybe I'll join the military. And my dad was like, no, you're not. He's like, why don't you look at Peace Corps? And so I started looking into it. At that time, I also knew that I wanted to learn another language, travel, kind of see the world at the same time. And so I started through the process of applying for Peace Corps. I actually chose a specific region. I knew that I kind of wanted to go to the Caribbean or to Central America. Next slide, please, Lauren. Thank you. And where I ended up going was to Guatemala. I was right on the border. I was stationed right on the border between Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala. After the training period, which was about 3 months, they helped me with some language skills. And at the same time, they gave me some cross-cultural training and also some training about the agricultural crops, culture, and what I would be doing at that particular time. And when I got to my site in Guatemala, they set me up with some kind of community leaders that we worked with in that particular area. And some of them were also kind of some host country agencies that we also worked in. So they didn't just kind of like throw me out in the middle of nowhere in this rural community. There was definitely infrastructure kind of built into it. So it was a relatively smooth transition into that. I went to a relatively rural area and that was fine. That's kind of what I wanted. There were some other volunteers that were in our group that preferred to go to a city, and that's what they chose to do. Next slide, Lauren, please. Thank you. And even though I had a degree in biology, they were like, "You're from Missouri. Of course, we're going to put you in the agricultural program," because everybody from Missouri is a farmer. But what we ended up doing is I got training to work there, and we worked on lots of different agricultural products. And so in this picture where it shows it looks like we're building rock walls, and that had kind of several advantages to it. One, it was for soil conservation, where we were also at, the soil was super rocky, and what it would do is it would improve kind of soil quality for their crops that they were looking at. and planting at that particular time. And then for each soil conservation, like practice that they did, they would also receive some sort of aid in the form of usually rice or sugar or something along those lines. Then on the other photograph there, I was working with Gudiel. We were comparing different fertilizers on different crops, and we were growing actually tomatoes there. Next slide, please, Lauren. Thank you. And then this was Freddie. He was and some of this stuff was not, it was agriculture related because they were selling a product, but this would be a perfect example where Freddie would grow these fruits, the jocotes, and then he would put a certain amount of time and effort into it. And I would just help them kind of go through and say, okay, this is how much, you need to sell each crate. This is how much your time's worth. This is what you need to get out of it. So it wasn't necessarily agricultural related, but it was also kind of the cost of production and help him calculate, how much money that he actually had into his crop. So, and he was grateful for that. And it kind of created an infrastructure and system for him to increase his productivity and his income. Next slide, please, Lauren. Perfect, thank you. We also worked on community projects. So for example, in the picture there in the upper left-hand corner, this is where we worked on a bridge to get out of town during the rainy season. So there was, one truck in town that we could get in and out, and that was kind of our main way to get in and out of town to kind of a larger community. And then when it would rain, oftentimes they would be trapped into that community. So we got some resources to work on that from the local area or from the local kind of governor. And then we also worked with World Vision and Arbor Day to plant trees. So it wasn't necessarily always just agricultural products or projects. They are often kind of diverse in nature in what we would do. And so, even though that they're like, you're going to work in agriculture, I ended up working like construction and building a bridge. We worked with, safe use of water, ways to access water, sustainability for the future. Next slide, please, Lauren. Yep, next slide, please. Oh, perfect, thanks. And so then this is another farmer that I worked with, Don Jesus, and his two sons. So one of the things that he was very interested in was working and producing or creating a sustainable future for his children. And this is where it was also kind of one of those cross-cultural exchange components. So like all of the men in the community would come together in at night to watch kind of TV. And Don Chus was the one that had the TV at his house, and they play cards and talk and kind of debrief about the day. And after I was there for about 6 months, one of the favorite TV shows that they had that they would always get was that there was Knight Rider and also Baywatch. So everybody that was in my village, like that was their view of America, was a night. They're like, oh, why'd you leave America? Everybody has a car that talks to you. And then everybody, then they would be like, I'd be like, no, not everybody has a car that talks to them. Matter of fact, not everybody even has a car. And then they would also would have these kind of ideas they would see on TV. They would see people walking down the street and pulling money out of what they would presume like random boxes, and they were like, America's so great, they just give money away. And I had to go through and explain, like, nope, that's an ATM, that's a bank, it's an automated system. You'll probably have them in another 5 to 10 years. So they had a lot of kind of misconceptions about what America was at that particular time. And so part of that was like, I would exchange and share like, well, that's not really exactly how America is how America is. It's not Baywatch and it's not Knight Rider. But at the same time, before I left to go down to Peace Corps, I would have people like, "You're going to Guatemala. All you're going to do is like, grow marijuana and cocaine, and that's it. And you're going to get shot." And you know, I didn't know a whole lot about Central America. I was this accurate, and the people that I work with they didn't grow marijuana. Many of them had never seen drugs or alcohol. They couldn't afford to drink, and none of them had guns or were involved with had weapons. So it was at the same time, it was very kind of taught me a lot also about that kind of culture of what was happening in Central America as well. And it definitely changed my perception of that as well. Lauren, next slide, please. I don't know if there's a delay. Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, and so that was a big part of it. Was one is that cultural exchange. Growing up here in kind of central Missouri and not really getting out a whole lot, it helped open up the world to me and realize different cultures, different perspectives of the world. And one of the things that I took away from my Peace Corps experience, and I still carry with me today, is a lot of the people that I worked and lived with in this very kind of rural village, they were some of the happiest people I know, right? And they didn't necessarily have, you know, big houses. They didn't have all of these, things that very much we take for granted, but they still found happiness. And so for me, that definitely tries to, teaches me or has taught me to live kind of in the moment. It's also helped me grow a lot and realize different cultures, diversity, and look at the world definitely through kind of a different eye, different view from that. It helped me learn a new language, which was a great kind of foundation for me moving on or moving forward. Also helped me get international job experience, which is a key thing. Every job I think that I've applied for since I was in Peace Corps, that's one of the first things they asked me in the interview is tell me about your Peace Corps experience. So I would like to think it definitely gives me a competitive advantage in hiring processes, because it's one of those things I have on my resume that definitely stands out. And then even professionally, 5 years ago, I was fortunate enough to take a sabbatical with my job. And through that, because I'd had previous international experience, I applied and got a Fulbright scholar. And that was also an international experience. And I got to use my language skills and my experience living and working in another country had made me more competitive for that. So still to this day, it's one of those things that helps me out and has definitely helped shape my life. And I think we're going to wait for questions at the end. Um, uh, and I'll go ahead. Should we wait for questions at the end, or what? What do you suggest? Questions at the end. Okay, I'll come back. We can talk about placement. I was originally offered a country in Belize, but then I chose Guatemala, and they were fine with that. But without further delay, I'd like to introduce you to Lisa. She was a volunteer in Zambia from 2008 to 2010. So without further delay, Lisa, take it away.
Thanks, Nathan. So, hello. Thanks for being here. It's fun to talk about Peace Corps. As Trevor mentioned, we were in Zambia together. And then the following year after we came back, I actually went to Georgia. And I won't talk about that today, but if you're interested, I'd be happy to talk about it later. I did Peace Corps Response, which is a shorter term experience. So Lauren, next slide, please. I just want to start out by saying I was a terrible Peace Corps volunteer. And I feel like it's kind of important to say that because I had such high expectations for myself. And I just thought, like, Peace Corps volunteers are these amazing people who do these amazing, noble, wonderful things. And I realized pretty soon after we got in country that I was just kind of a disaster in a lot of ways. So I'll talk a little bit about that and kind of how it still wound up being a pretty amazing experience. But I was asked to be an education volunteer. And even in training, I realized like this was not going to work because I I have no experience with I mean, education. I was educated, but I had taught college, but not little children. And in fact, as you can see, just the side of my face made the small children cry. Next, please. But luckily, I was able to buy some friends. It turns out that Matchbox cars are an excellent currency in terms of just winning hearts, or at least like small children to be your friends. And so that was kind of my initial strategy of sort of fitting into the community. And it worked to some extent. I found my people. Next, please. But really, what worked in terms of bonding with people in the village turned out to be food. And I think this is true the world over, that food is kind of an international language, and hanging out with people and eating tends to be a wonderful way of becoming part of a community and just getting to know people and getting to know a community and just having a chance to hang out with people. Because as it turns out, that kind of, in some ways, was the real key to becoming part of our community in a small village in rural eastern province of Zambia. Next, please. But even that, like cooking, building those friendships and hanging out, getting to know people, it took time. This is a picture of our host mom cooking maize over, as you can see, just a couple of stumps and then clay pots. And they actually have field corn there that they eat. And as my dad educated me later, in America, we don't eat this because we eat sweet corn typically, but in Zambia, they don't get enough sunlight. We were right on the equator. And so the days were 12 hours of sunlight and 12 hours of dark pretty much all year round. And apparently there's not enough sunlight for I guess Nathan would know this as a biologist, there's not enough sunlight for the sugars to develop or something. So, but we ate it anyway. So this is some cooking in the traditional way. Next, please. So when you join Peace Corps, the Peace Corps asks you to spend about 3 months at site, just hanging out. They call it the settling in period. You're supposed to spend some time getting to know people in the village. And instead of leaping in and starting to do a project right away, Peace Corps asks you to hang out and get to know people and figure out sort of what the needs are and how you can be most useful. I have to admit that for me, this was really hard because I am a doer. Even now when I was listening, I'm like working on my needlework project. I am antsy and I have a hard time ever sitting still. And so this was actually one of the most difficult things I've ever tried to do, just to hang out and try to get a sense of what needs to happen. But I did get more comfortable. The pace of life is very different in Zambia. There is a lot of hanging out. There's a lot of waiting. There's a lot of waiting for buses, waiting for lunch, waiting for people to show up for meetings. And I did get more comfortable with it. It was never easy. I made a lot of socks. I knitted a lot, but I kind of channeled my anxiety into knitting. But and waiting for food is I think always a worthy thing. Next, please. So, and we did get to know people. Like I said, we spent a lot of time hanging out and we learned, one thing about moving to a rural village in the middle of nowhere in Zambia is that we had a lot to learn about just how to live. We didn't know anything, and when I say it was a disaster, like one of the areas was just, Trevor and I got there and we really knew nothing. I mean, this is lunch in Zambia. And, of course, our first question was, where's the fork? What is this? How do you do this? And we had to learn how to take a little ball of, well, first of all, wash hands. It's a tradition that people wash each other's hands with a pitcher that gets passed around the mat that you're sitting on. And then you take a little ball of the white stuff. That's the corn paste. It's been ground down and then cooked. Take a little ball of it. It's kind of the consistency of Play-Doh, and then pick up the stuff on the side. In that case, it's called Chihuahua. I didn't know how to spell it, but it's basically like greens mixed with like pounded ground nuts, peanut butter, basically, a real thin, and then mixed with tomatoes and onions. It's delicious, but it took some practice. It's a little slimy and hard to pick up, but delicious. Next, please. And yeah, like I said, we hung out a lot with our peer group, which turned out to be the kids. They tended to be the ones that were willing to just hang out with us. They had the patience. And even if they were working, even the little girls, as you can see here, they're making dinner, they're peeling the potatoes. They were busy all the time too, but they at least were willing to kind of hang out and talk to us. They were just endlessly interested in watching us, and we were interested in watching them too. So it was kind of a good mutual hangout society. We would hang around our hut, and even if we were trying to read a book or something, inevitably within about a minute there would be at least one kid, maybe 5 kids, like pressed up against us just watching, just because we were so different, so weird. As Trevor said, I think, well, I know with these kids, they had seen like precisely one other white person in their lives, which is the volunteer who had been in the compound before us, so it was a mutual fascination society. And also, they were just the kids were awesome with us. They were just so nice to us, and were always willing to talk to us and show us things and teach us words for things and hang out. Next, please. But I got to say, I had to set some limits. One of the first things I learned how to say in Nyanja, the language that we spoke in Zambia, was Papani, Sindikudia Nyama, which means, sorry, I don't eat meat. Because as you can see, shockingly, that was sometimes really necessary for me. Even if I did eat meat, I'm pretty sure I would not have been able to eat a mouse. But that was kind of a delicacy. Kids would catch field mice, not house mice, because those are dirty, but field mice, and fry them up as a meal. And we'll just go to the next slide because I don't want to look at that one anymore. But that kind of experience was really motivating to me to learn how to cook. So we, at the same time that we were becoming part of our family and kind of eating with them and hanging out with them, we were trying to become independent ourselves to some extent in the village. And so this was a constant source of enjoyment, but also frustration. As you can see, this is our cooking shelter, and we were able to kind of set it up outside so that we could do cooking for ourselves and shop in the village and kind of replicate, at least to some extent, things that were somewhat familiar. And I'm glad that I think my parents are watching. So I'm very proud to point out that my dad built that little cooker in the corner. We cooked over, at that point, we were cooking over a charcoal brazier that was the local kind of standard for cooking. But then my dad built me that little box thing that was an outdoor oven that the heat kind of circulated in there. And I think in that picture, I'm making cookies and maybe even like a little pizza-ish sort of a thing. So lots of experiments, not always successful, but we just kind of kept just failing our way through, trying new things and goofing around. Next, please. And that was part of the adventure for me. Eventually, I was able to become part of a group of literacy tutors. There were a group of women in the surrounding area that were sort of as a mutual aid society, teaching ones who could read and write, were teaching others. And so this picture is this woman, Kistri Puri, who is a literacy tutor that I got to know. And she invited me to her house to learn how to make these vegetarian sausages that she knew how to make. And so we spent a day in her house cooking beans, and we had to peel them and make these sausages. And it was a wonderful experience. I will tell you that I brought this picture back to the US. I came back for a visit at one point, and I printed copies to give to Kistri. I didn't think she had a picture of herself printed out, and then also to the mom of the little boy in the front. And by the time I came back from the US, they were both dead. And sadly, this is like a really common experience, and you probably can't tell in the picture, but Kistri has her thing that she's wearing on her lap is like a piece of fabric that Zambians, it's a shitenje that women cover their legs. They're very modest about showing their legs and their knees, especially. And so women typically wear these wraps around their lower half, and hers has little red flags or red ribbons on it. So she was HIV positive. So she passed away pretty soon after this picture was taken. And then the little boy drowned in a well. So much tragedy. I mean, honestly, like so many of the people that we met and that we got to know died, like either while we were there or soon after. And I mean, that's part of I think the really hard thing about Peace Corps is just, there's so much tragedy. There's, as Nathan said, so much joy and so much just contentment and happiness and community, and also just so much tragedy. And that's part of why we're there, right? To help with things like covering wells and hand washing and all that kind of thing, but in HIV prevention. So yeah, some of the tragedy and some of the challenges. But moving on from that, next, please. Sorry to be a downer. I promise it won't be that sad anymore. But we did have some success, and actually Trevor had some of the most success. And because Trevor is way more outgoing and friendly than I am, he was just a champion of meeting farmers and getting to know people. And he was an agriculture volunteer. And so he befriended this farmer, Benson Banda, and Benson invited us to his farm that was kind of close to where we lived. So we walked over one day and he showed us all around and introduced us to his wives. He had two of them, the second of which he had married because, as you can see behind him, he's got this big corn field. There are a lot of wild monkeys, or I guess they're like big monkeys, and they will steal the corn from people's fields when it starts to get ready to harvest. And so Benson had he didn't have the money to hire somebody to guard the corn. And so he had married a second wife to have somebody. In our family, there were enough children that they could sort of camp out and guard the corn. But in Benson's case, he had to think a little bit more creatively. But a wonderful farmer. When I remember when we went to, this was like keeping with the theme of food. I remember Benson brought us to his house and handed us each a huge glass of fresh milk, like so fresh it had like grass kind of in it. And Trevor, such a champ, he drank his, and then I kind of sneaky handed him mine. He drank mine, and then Benson handed Trevor the baby. He was so proud of his new baby that it's instantly peed all over Trevor. So he was very relaxed. Next, please. And then I thought, I love food, and Benson said he had all this fruit. I think it was guavas that he had, and I had taken a class through Mizzou Extension on how to can the harvest, and I thought, awesome, here I can show my knowledge and transfer my skills. I'm going to have them over and teach them how to make jam. So they came over, Benson and his original wife, and they brought their guavas. I bought some sugar in town, and we cooked it up, and we cooked it and 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 stirred it and cooked it. And it never turned into jam. It just was like soup, fruit soup, kind of delicious, but never turned into jam. So that was a little disappointing, but we jarred it up and they took it home with them and they were thrilled. But I think they were also wondering, like, what is this lady's problem? But that's okay. Next, please. So that was one experiment that didn't quite work out. But I have to say, everything got better when I just completely gave up on trying to be an elementary education volunteer. And that was kind of in the background throughout this whole process. And it just never worked out for reasons that are way too boring to get into here. But I decided to kind of embrace what I'm actually good at. And just by luck, met this wonderful woman, Elizabeth Mbewe, who came by our house one day and just said, I heard you're the new volunteer in town. She had been friends with our predecessor. What do you know how to do? And she was just super bold. And she lived in America. She would be Oprah. She was amazing. And basically she was just like, come and help us do something. And she ran a women's group in a village called Musalila, which was up and over this mountain. And Musalila means you must not cry. And the women's group there was incredible. They just wanted to learn how to do stuff. And you can buy there are tailors who make clothes for people. You can pay a couple dollars to get like a suit, like a fancy little outfit made. And the tailors have these little scraps left over. And so I thought, crazy quilting, awesome. So I taught this group of women how to make crazy quilts, and they took to it immediately. And if you'll go to the next slide, I spent a couple days with them, kind of teaching them what I knew, and then they just ran with it. They made a bunch of amazing little pouches that I think they were trading around in the villages, and hopefully were able to sell at some point. And that was really fun. And I felt like kind of finally a little bit of a successful project. So transferring a skill of something that I actually did know how to do. And then the next slide, please. And then we also made rugs. As you can see, the one in the foreground, is a little lumpy, which I didn't make that one, but that's how it would have looked if I had made it. But they also make rugs out of the scraps that they get from the tailor. But I said, why not like crochet them? Because they crochet baby clothes there, but they had never thought to crochet big things. It's just not like they don't really wear a lot of sweaters there. It's usually like 100 degrees, so not a lot of need for that. But rugs, like little rugs to put in the hut, were a popular item. And I, through another volunteer, met a guy who did woodworking, and so I took some of those huge crochet hooks to this guy in another village, and he just carved out of sticks like some huge crochet hooks. So then I took them to Musalila, and we were able to use some of the same scraps to make rugs. And then the guy in the front is the sewing teacher. He is actually wearing a sweater vest. It is kind of surprising that you see people wearing, like, you can see I'm wearing a t-shirt, and I was probably like having a heat stroke, but I think people in Zambia have kind of like, they've just grown up with a different conception of what heat is and what's cold and what's hot. Anyway, so he was the sewing teacher because thanks to the Mid-Missouri Return Peace Corps group that does fundraising throughout the year, I was able to apply for a small grant. I think I got $150, and that was enough to buy this treadle sewing machine. So we took it out to the village, and the group hired the sewing teacher to come, and they were going to get sewing lessons and learn how to make school uniforms, because kids in Zambia, school education is free officially, but the kids have to supply their own. They have to wear a uniform to go to school, and then they also have to supply their own like notebooks and pens. And for people who live in a completely cashless, and not like in a credit card way, but like in a no money changes hands kind of a way, that's a really big ask. And so having the ability to make their own school uniforms probably meant that some of the kids that weren't able to were finally able to go to school. So that felt really good. Next, please. But then, kind of while we were getting things going with the women's group and some other things, we decided, or we kind of asked to, and then it all came together that I got asked to take on a different role, and Trevor took on a different role. We moved from the village into the provincial capital, and I became a volunteer leader, which meant that I kind of had a different job in sort of looking out for other volunteers and then being a liaison with the staff. And one of the things that I got to do was drive a Land Cruiser, which was really fun, on the wrong side, or it's the right side for them, but different side for us, and work with new volunteers. And so that was super fun. This is a picture of picking them up in Lusaka, loading up the Land Cruiser. You can see it's like stacked sky high with all their belongings, and then bringing them out to the village. So next, please. And I have to say, for me, this was a much better fit job-wise, because as anybody that knows me will tell you, I do tend to be a little bit on the bossy side, and I love kind of coordinating things and managing things. And so this was a really wonderful role. I got to help teach the new volunteers sort of how to acclimate, like we had to learn a year earlier. And part of that was going to the market. This is the market in Chapada, the big city, and just figuring out, like, how do you navigate this? Like, how do you wade into this giant, unstructured, just blob of people and stuff and language and people talking to you, and you don't understand what they're saying, and figure out what you need and how to get it and how to get out to your site. So that was a really rewarding switch for me. Next, please. And then another thing that I got to do was manage the household staff. There's a house in Peace Corps in Chapada, which is the provincial capital. In Peace Corps, Zambia has these houses that are scattered because the country is so big that they want a place where volunteers who are nearby can go to get like medical care or other materials or support, because we were about a day to the provincial capital and then another day traveling to Lusaka, the capital, where the main staff was. And then we had volunteers that were even farther away. So just for safety purposes, they wanted like satellite offices. So I managed the staff. We had Ba Esteri is the one in red. She's the housekeeper. And then Stella is there in the uniform. Then a couple of volunteers. And then I managed the dog. One of the things I got to do was remove the stitches from the dog because the vet was afraid of her. And so Nathan mentioned Baywatch and watching TV. We had a similar situation. Ba Esteri loved to watch movies in the house. We had a bunch of videotapes that people had left behind. She loved Pulp Fiction, which she thought was 100% true, that we have ninjas. And she loved Babe. if you've ever seen, it's like a kids movie with a talking pig. Sorry, talking pig. Sorry, I'm so excited. I choked myself. So Ba Esther believed this movie, and she thought that we really do have talking pigs in America. And because I got along so well with Sophie, the dog, she thought that I was actually speaking with the dog, like we were having a conversation. And I just let her think it. Next slide, please. And one of the best things that I got to do was hire a new gardener for the house, because the previous gardener left. Mr. Ngoma had been working as the guard, he was the night guard. So he worked 12-hour shifts from whatever, I think 7 in the evening until 7 in the morning. But when the previous gardener left, I was asked to find a new one. And so I asked Mr. Ngoma if he'd be interested in the job. He was delighted, because it meant not only not having to work overnight, which he didn't like leaving his family, but he got a huge pay raise, and it was a lot more stability, to $85 a month. And I have to tell you, he was incredibly grateful, like so grateful to have this job. I mean, he told me a million times. Next, please. And we became friends. He's just a wonderful guy. I mean, I think you can tell from the pictures that he's just like the sweetest, most wonderful guy. Terrible for a guard, I have to say, because he weighs like 85 pounds. He's like this tiny little guy, but just the nicest and sweetest, most wonderful guy. Great gardener. Trevor grew some trees, and they were able to take them out. That previous picture was them loading up a bunch of trees on a Land Cruiser to take out to Mr. Ngoma's village. And so that was also really wonderful to be able to find somebody great to work for Peace Corps, but also to kind of help him move into a new position that I think was a really great fit for him. Next, please. But then, like all too soon, it was done. And we were ready to take off. We took one last trip. We went down to Livingston and saw Victoria Falls. And then we came home. Next, please. And how Peace Corps has affected me now is that we're still friends with some of our friends from Zambia. On the left, this is just maybe 2 months ago. We went down to Ozark, Missouri to see our friend Jafar. I'm sorry, the pictures are terrible. It was really bright. I couldn't see what I was taking pictures of, but he is a farmer now in rural Ozark, Missouri. He was there right when we got there, and we became friends. He lives down in the Ozarks. We see him at least a couple times a year, and just spent some time visiting him and his family. He was putting together his outdoor food washing station for his CSA. And then our friend Ashley there in the middle is a neighbor. She lives down the street. We were lucky enough to kind of lure her to Columbia, and she's been here ever since, lives around the corner. And that's from last summer. I mean, I saw her like literally like 3 hours ago when she walked by with her dogs, but we have taken some trips and just, continue to be really good friends with some of these people that we have this incredible bond with, because we went through something so profound together. Next, please. And Peace Corps continues to be part of our lives. That picture on the left is the send-off party. Every spring, Peace Corps hosts a party to send off the volunteers who are leaving. A lot of people typically take off in the spring to have their Peace Corps adventures. And so we have a party and just kind of talk to them, encourage them, try not to scare them too much with our stories. But and you can see Mike's there on the right-hand side. You'll be hearing from him in just a second with the twins, who I heard in the background. We may get a little cameo some twins. And then, of course, Ashley again. This is at an Earth Day booth that Trevor was doing, but Ashley and I helped out a little bit with the game with Peace Corps countries, and people had to try to find them on the map. Next, please. We also volunteer at Loaves and Fishes. So if anybody's interested in joining us, we do the 5th Fridays. And this picture's from last year, but we just did it last Friday. So we serve with a group of people. In fact, most of the same people who are in that picture are still volunteering. It's a lot of fun. We go and cook food and hand it out. And that's kind of a great way for us to sort of have that same experience of Peace Corps in Colombia. Next slide. And this is my last one, I promise. And Peace Corps just continues to be part of my life. Just a week or two ago, I got a random Facebook message from Mr. Ngoma. And this is Mr. Ngoma on the left. He still works for Peace Corps. He still has the job. He's still so happy. It's provided stability and a great income for his family. And he just took his first ever in his entire life plane ride to go to Lusaka to get vaccinated. And so he sent me pictures of his wife and the kids, and just again told me how grateful he was for the opportunity to have that job. And so to me, it just like was, I can't even express how wonderful it felt to know that like these years later, it continues to make a difference in his life. And even if that's the only thing I accomplished, that's plenty for me. And we're vaccinated too. So good news all around. And hopefully soon a lot of Zambians will be vaccinated. And so Peace Corps volunteers can go back, and the next generation will get to meet Mr. Ngoma and the rest of the wonderful Zambians and have a great experience. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike Burden, who you saw in that picture a couple moments ago with his twins. And we met Mike, I think, Trevor says, I don't remember this, but at a library event, one of these panels, like 10, 11 years ago, when somebody else was talking and we had been home for about a week, and there was Mike Burden. So he served in Mongolia, and he's going to tell you all about it.
All right. Thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing your story, and also to you, Nate, and thanks for the introduction. Good evening, everybody. You can go ahead and forward the next slide, Lauren. Thank you. So, Ogloni Mint, Hurgi, Sanbano. It's good evening and hello. And Sanbano is a pretty easy greeting to learn. So if you want to practice it, it literally means, is there good? And there's always good. So the answer is San. I served in Mongolia with my wife, Ashley, not the same Ashley that you met in Lisa's presentation, a different Ashley. And Mongolia is in Central Asia, sandwiched between China and Russia. Russia played a pretty big role in Mongolia's political life in much of the 20th century, till the end of the Cold War, basically. And on the very western edge, it doesn't quite, but it looks like it kisses the border of Kazakhstan. But there's a lot of shared culture between Kazakhs and Mongolians. Its central, its capital city is Ulaanbaatar, affectionately known as UB. And most or nearly half or around half of the population live in the capital city. It's a sparsely populated country. We lived out in the west in Bayanhunger, which borders China to the south. And Bayanhunger means rich love. So we thought, hey, that's a great place to be. And it recently celebrated its 30th anniversary of the Peace Corps. And we were so fortunate, just like 2 weeks ago, we were on a Zoom call with Peace Corps staff from Mongolia and return volunteers from like all 30 years of Peace Corps service there, kind of recapping the history of the program. It's a fantastic country, and it's a really welcoming place to be a Peace Corps volunteer. And I hope that Peace Corps would say that about all of its placements, but it's really one of those countries that there'll be times where the president will attend the swearing in ceremony. So they really embraced Peace Corps, and we were fortunate that the folks there before us had helped to lay the groundwork. So can you go ahead and move to the next slide? So I want to talk about how we got there first and where we lived. Much like these folks have shared with you, I had a desire to do something internationally. I played a sport in college that was over both semesters, so I never had the chance to study abroad, but I had learned about Peace Corps. And as I went to grad school at Mizzou, finally I met some people that served in the Peace Corps. And so the idea of this thing and this opportunity became more of a realistic opportunity as I heard people's stories. And then I got connected with this awesome group here, the Central Missouri Return Peace Corps Volunteers, and started hearing more and more stories. And my wife, who we were dating at the time, and it's something we both agreed we wanted to do, and it just took us a few years to create the space to do it. So why Mongolia? We just said we'd go anywhere and do anything. And we knew that as a married couple, it can be a little more complex to place you. I had teaching experience, and my wife had worked in health education at the Alzheimer's Association. So those are two kind of natural fit areas, and neither one of us had really any language skills. So that we kind of figured they would probably send us to one of those countries where nobody comes in speaking Mongolian. So we started with hello. And so when we got the invitation, we're like, okay, that wasn't on our radar, but let's do it. And I'm so glad we did. I think it's a place that it's a long ways away. It's not necessarily the easiest or inexpensive place to travel to, although I highly recommend you take the time to do it. But I don't know that we had would have gone there any other way. So I'm so lucky that I'd like to say Mongolia chose us. So you see our home here. This is a ger, GER. It's traditional Mongolian form of housing. Not every Mongolian lives in a ger. In fact, we spent the first year in an apartment, even though we really wanted to live in a ger. Your host country agency is responsible for finding new housing, and our agencies figured that living in a ger would be too hard for us. But fortunately, about halfway through our service, the woman who owned our apartment was moving, and she wanted to sell it, and so we're like, we need to find a place to live. And so that was kind of a fun process. My counterpart, Inkma, who is just an amazing person and great work partner and friend, she said, well, my family has, a ger that we grew up in, they had not since built a house. And so we like got into their attic and pulled out the ger poles and started cleaning it up and putting it together. Really, we mostly watched and tried to be helpful as Inkma's brother put it together. We just tried not to like do anything wrong, but it's a fairly simple structure and it's traditional. People have been living in them for hundreds of years. It can easily be packed up and moved, which is pretty important as no, Mongolia is a nomadic culture traditionally. So there's our ger. It's a really no running water, but we had electricity, so we did have some nice amenities. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I was told to embrace, and I think everybody would agree, is like the best way to get to know the culture is to participate. And sometimes that can be embarrassing as you're stumbling with language, or when you're wearing a revealing wrestling uniform. And so you had the opportunity to play lots of sports. Mongolia has a strong tradition in the three manly sports, they call them, although women participate in archery, wrestling, archery, and horseback riding. And wrestling had been a big part of my life. So I'm like, oh, great, I'm going to a wrestling country. So I'm going to wrestle. A little bit different style of wrestling and a little bit different attire, but the spirit of the sport was definitely the same. You can see my wife Ashley there and all dressed up for a special performance. The 65th anniversary of her health department where she worked was celebrated while we were there. And that meant for the 4 weeks prior to that, like a lot of the staff, nurses, doctors, health educators were spending hours, extra hours in their workday, like every day, like mastering dances to perform because big important people were coming from the capital for the celebration. So she learned and performed some traditional dances on stage, including a solo dance. It was super cool. And we found that both singing, music is a big part of the culture. One of the best ways that I made friends with was memorizing some songs early on and being willing to sing publicly. Although I'm not so willing to sing publicly anymore. So in Mongolia, and when the kids go to play, instead of sand castles, they build sand gers. So that was from our very first road trip. Next slide. And that first road trip, which we took in that van, was one of the kind of most important lessons we learned when we got to our site, which was to let go. The trust the people that we were working with, and that we weren't going to know everything, all the details of what was happening. So shortly after we arrived, my director Oyuna said, we're going to the countryside and you and Ashley are coming with us. And we're like, well, where in the countryside? And she's like, the countryside. That's just kind of what they say about like going out in the country and camping. So we're like, okay, I guess we're going. And so we arrive, and at that point, we had mostly traveled via official Peace Corps. So that was, about 8 people in a van, or 5 people in a car. Really kind of a posh way of traveling. Well, we showed up, and I knew all my coworkers were going, and I was looking, and I'm like, "Where's the other vehicle?" They're like, "Oh, there is no other vehicle. All 18 of us are going in that van." And along with a keg of fermented mare's milk too. So, and guitars and other things you need for a fun time in the countryside. It was a little crowded, but that really gave us a sense of what traveling was going to be like. And it was a fantastic time. And we were nervous. We were like, we're not supposed to leave site, but well, it's with our coworkers, so we're supposed to get to know them, so we might as well go. And it ended up just being a great time to get to know them. And a lesson that we carried with us is to just go ahead and let go. We're not going to be able to control everything. And it's not always going to go the way we expect, but that's okay. And that includes what to eat. So Mongolia's they've got 3 million people and 40 million head of livestock. So most people don't want for meat and dairy products. And I will be honest, the innards are not my favorite. But when we're on trips, we always got to try what was offered. I won't say that I always loved it, but some of the food is delicious. But innards, not my favorite one. Go ahead and turn to the next slide. So part of that embracing the local approach was, that I found frustrating actually was that, and most of the things that we wanted to do, as much time went into planning the ceremony, the opening event, as would go into the project or the plan. And as wanting to stay focused on the task at hand, I found myself early on getting kind of frustrated until I just learned that like this is equally important. That everything we're going to do, if it's going to be of any substance, is going to have a musical and dance performance at the beginning, and that's pretty awesome. So we might as well just lean into it. So there's a couple of my students dancing in the left-hand corner. That was the kickoff of our mentoring program. We kind of modeled after the Big Brothers Big Sisters. So I was pretty lucky in my job placement, and that I taught at a university. I taught English, and it was just kind of like I would here. I mean, I knew I was teaching 3 classes of business English and 2 classes of hotel and restaurant management, and my students were expected to be there on time. And I co-taught almost all my classes with my counterpart. So in terms of job ambiguity, which is something that a lot of volunteers experience, I had kind of a regular, teaching gig, and a really great bunch of coworkers to work with. And there's Ashley down in the bottom picture there. Getting to do one of the really cool things about Peace Corps. We were doing a water quality workshop. So it wasn't something that either one of us had a background in, but we got to do some work with environmental education. And then that opened doors to going in and getting a week-long training on how to collect macroinvertebrates and use them as an indicator species for water quality. And then we got to go out and do that in our state with professionals and biologists like Nate, who were probably better trained. So we really like collecting little bugs and categorizing them and showing people the dances that they do to identify them. And it was a lot of fun. And then that last photo is of Sid Devsurin, a really close friend of ours, who opened our eyes to what came to be a really big project that we worked on, working with kids with disabilities. And so I had kind of an in as someone who wore a prosthetic. And I was playing volleyball in the community a lot, and got to know her sort of through that community. And she brought it to our attention that there was a lot of kids with different disabilities, mostly caused by childhood meningitis, who didn't really have like outlets for sports or therapy, and they had a higher dropout rate, in the population and the schools than the rest of the population. So we started working with her and finding out what we could do, and she had a vision, a big vision, kind of bigger than Peace Corps project vision, to build a center for physical and occupational therapy, for educating teachers. And so we worked with her over the course of a year to help kind of connect her to additional resources. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end, because it connects to my family back home. She's just an amazing person to work with. So we were part of a cluster site, which was pretty cool. So we had some other Peace Corps volunteers nearby us. And of course, Ashley served at the health department, and I was a teacher. And so we got to bring our coworkers together. We also had a youth development volunteer and a business volunteer, Fahad, who's walking away in that photo of the crowd. That's our town's first ever Earth Day celebration. And all the schools are parading around as part of kind of a community awareness campaign about Earth Day. and Pagma, one of my coworkers, is down there with me with the watershed model that the students and I made to talk about water quality. Something that I had no experience doing before Peace Corps, but got some amazing training on how to do it there, and really learned a lot about it. And Mongolia is a water scarce country. It's also mineral rich, so it has a lot of potential pollutants that can get in their waterways, from some, especially from like artisanal gold mining, copper mining, and so forth. So it's something people were concerned about, they knew about. There wasn't a lot of data, and so that was what we were doing, was like trying to provide some basic and inexpensive ways to collect some data on water quality. Go ahead and flip to the next slide, please. So these are our students and their mentoring program. We had a juice party, to just drink juice, kind of a say no to alcohol sort of deal. And they were wonderful. We just basically used what we had heard about Big Brothers Big Sisters, and some people had some experience with mentoring there, and it's going to build on that model of trying to partner with kids in the local schools that might need a mentor. And we had some great young people at my university that were willing to do this new thing, and to be a big brother or big sister to some kids in the community. Okay, Lauren, you can advance to the next slide. So my takeaways and the things that carry with me, if I had to sum it up in one word, I would say perspective. I'm from a tiny town that doesn't even have a stoplight. And I was fortunate to have, parents who encouraged me to be curious about the world. But I hadn't traveled much prior to serving in Mongolia, and post Peace Corps, we spent 3 months traveling in Southeast Asia, and just I was amazed at with the people that I met, with the leadership of our coworkers, our fellow Peace Corps volunteers, the Mongolian Peace Corps staff. It's just an amazing place that I never would have really got to know much more than the history of Chinggis Khan and the Mongol Empire, had I not. I've got some guests coming in to the presentation now. They're being quiet though, so that's good. Yeah, so I hope someday to take my children, and when they're just a few years older and can travel easily and remember it all, to visit our friends and coworkers there, because it's a place that I think about every day. And especially recently, we've had some tragedy of some folks we knew that served with who passed away, and then just reconnected with some other people with the anniversary, and it's definitely shaped my life, much like others have mentioned, opened up opportunities. It's taught me you don't have to be an expert, to contribute. I had done yoga in the United States, but I had no yoga certification, but yet I was teaching yoga classes in Mongolia. Nobody asked to see my credentials. They just said, you want to teach yoga to kids? Yeah, sure, let's do it. And then it really taught me how to be a community member, which is something that, I'm not embarrassed to say I didn't really know what that meant before I went to the Peace Corps, about how to actively engage in a community and try and see what its needs are. And that's because as a volunteer, you're so deliberately trying to do that and struggling and failing, when you're living in another country. So when I came back home, I started looking for those opportunities here, and got involved with some efforts through Unite for Healthy Neighborhoods, and we helped start a community garden. And it was the kind of same grassroots, kind of going knocking on doors, talking to people. Then I reconnected with the Central Missouri Return Peace Corps volunteer group, which was just a great group of people. And that brings me to one of the other aspects that I'm really thankful for, is just the network I have of friends, both in Mongolia and also fellow Peace Corps volunteers and people who have served elsewhere. I love hearing their stories and perspectives, and they've opened up a lot of doors for me in terms of career and experiences. We were very lucky while we were serving to have my mom and my grandfather come to visit us. My grandfather was 84 when he came to Mongolia, and he had served in the Navy at the end of World War II. And so he traveled a little bit, but it had been a while and he'd never been there. And there, that last photo is us connected with my host family that hosted me for the first 3 months. So that's an experience that they really cherished, and gave us a chance to really do that third goal sharing, kind of real time, which was really cool. We got to ride horses with my mom and my grandpa and introduce them to our host families, and it's something that I definitely will never forget. And my mom, my grandfather, and friends and family helped to organize a fundraising event back home while we were serving in Peace Corps that was enough seed money. It was about modest $5,000, but that helped to like move the ball forward on Sid Discern's project to connect her to bigger grants with World Vision, and Save the Children. To eventually, a few years after we left, she realized that plan of building a care center and staffing it through local government support. So that was really cool. There was a lot of meetings and a lot of coordination, and so it was a neat way to connect, my friends and family back home to something that's kind of still going on in Mongolia today. So that I could talk longer, but I'm going to stop. Big takeaway, you should go to Mongolia and take plenty of time to do it, because it takes a long time to travel around there. It's beautiful, and the people are super welcoming and friendly.
Great job, Mike. And great job to Lisa and Nate for sharing their stories as well. If you continue to have an interest in Peace Corps and want to know more, I encourage you to visit peacecorps.gov. My contact information is also on there, and I will put it in the chat there. There's also, Mike mentioned the group in town, the Central Missouri Return Peace Corps volunteers are active with various service and social get-togethers. And if you just want to sit and talk to somebody about international service, if you're interested or just want to hear more stories of service, one of the takeaways from these three tales that I've heard was that there was a long time interest in service. Everybody met great people who wanted to do good projects, and they ended up doing things they didn't expect they were going to do because they were flexible. So I think that's one of the key elements of being a successful volunteer in the Peace Corps, even if you think you're a failure or you're not great at it, is just the idea that flexibility, and if you are interested in applying, part of my job as the Peace Corps recruiter is to help with those applications. But I will also say, if you just want to talk about international service and hear about alternatives to the Peace Corps, there's a lot of other great groups out there that you can go and serve. And they don't have the 27-month requirement, and you may do some different things than the Peace Corps. But I encourage you, if you've got an interest, please reach out to us. One of the questions that came up I saw earlier was somebody asked about, Laura Page asked how you're placed and do you rank preferred countries. You can handle that two different ways. You apply to a specific job. So if you go to peacecorps.gov and you click through and you find the volunteer openings, you apply for a specific job. But in the process of making the application, you can also say, I'll go anywhere and do anything. And it's brave to say that, because you're kind of leaping across the abyss and hoping that there's a net there that they're going to catch you. And that's what happens, is that Peace Corps does put you in a place where your skills are tapped, and your service has the greatest impact, or has the potential to have great impact. And Peace Corps likes the applicants that say, I'll go anywhere and do anything, because they have more flexibility with where they put you. Mike mentioned he served with his wife. I serve with my wife. That's a challenge for Peace Corps to try to find two settings, a setting for both of those skill sets. So you can absolutely pick where you serve. I don't necessarily see any more questions. Lauren, do you see any more?
Looks like Lisa has her hand up. Lisa, if you still had a question, you can unmute and ask that if you'd like.
Oh yes, Lisa Schwartz is a Columbia resident, a Peace Corps medical officer, former Peace Corps medical officer in Cape Verde.
Hi, Lisa.
I'm not ready. I've got a geriatric dog that is needing me at the moment. Completely interfered, but you guys did an amazing job. And yes,
Thanks,
we will
Lisa.
hang out soon, I hope.
Excellent.
Huh? Right? You're back?
Excellent.
Yeah.
We're back.
So I know that it's been 20 years since I served as a PCMO, and I know things have changed. But I can tell people stories, and I mean, if they're interested, but I can also assure you that there's nothing that Peace Corps wants more than to take care of the health of all their volunteers. They put a lot of effort into it. So a lot of us are worried about being so remote without health care. I wasn't a volunteer, so I commend all the rest of you, but there is a lot of medical care available for everyone. Good to see you too, Mike.
Yeah, one of the things that people ask me in the recruiting realm is, what's the insurance like? And I have to tell them there is no insurance because you just have access. I felt like I had access to medical care and dental care in a way that I never have in America, in terms of just this person who's just universally there. Well, what do you need? What do you want? So Peace Corps can accommodate many health issues that might be pre-existing. So don't let a health issue dissuade you. Don't let age dissuade you. You're never too old for the Peace Corps.
Yeah. Can I say something about health real quick, Trevor?
Please do.
So I did not know, this is kind of embarrassing, but I didn't even know that my body, having a fever was my body fighting off an infection, and that you shouldn't take Tylenol or ibuprofen for a low grade fever. It's just one of the many things I learned through our medical training about how to take care of yourself. And our medical training was fantastic. And also, during service, my arm, the Mongolian arid climate was kind of hard on my prosthetics, and I cracked one, and it was something that I used for sports, and I was doing a lot of sports related teaching, and Peace Corps paid for that new prosthetic during my service. That was pretty cool, the way they had my back really easily, without any strings attached or elaborate paperwork.
I did want to ask, you said never too old to serve. And so I've missed the, and someone in the chat has put this here, same thing, encouraging to hear about age because I'm 66. I haven't had time to sign up. It's one of my maybe post-retirement dreams. I didn't get to do it on the before or the right after college end. Maybe I could do it. But you do encourage people who are older to apply?
Absolutely. Because you, Lauren Williams, bring so much life experience and skill set and this is not to knock somebody coming right out of college. Be delicate, how do I say this? You just have a lot of life experience that somebody coming right out of college doesn't have. You have, as well as a degree. That said, most Peace Corps volunteers are in their 20s. Female volunteers make up the majority. Most volunteers, about 45%, end up in education. So part of your placement is based on physical ability. So, we were told that Zambia was one of the harder physical countries to be in. Then we got back and everybody from every country said, oh, they told us that too. So it's possible that Peace Corps might send older volunteers to more urban settings, places that are a little bit more, just have public services and infrastructure in a way that, doesn't sound like Mongolia and Guatemala and Zambia really have. So you'll be in, it might be tempered to your capacity at age 60 or 70 or whenever you go for it. And Erin Robinson has commented here about the oldest PCV was in her 80s. Jimmy Carter's mom, my understanding is in the 70s, when she was in her 80s, served in India. There we go. Lisa's on it. So Lauren, just
Found it online.
Just because you didn't do it, be a Peace Corps volunteer right out of college doesn't mean we won't take you upon retirement. We love it. So I have nothing else to add. I don't know if there's any more questions. If Lauren wants to say the final prayer over this or wrap this up, my contact information is in the chat. I'm happy to get folks connected with other return volunteers or talk to folks about the process of applying. So I thank everyone for their attention tonight and being present.
Yes, thank you. Thanks to our panelists for sharing their expertise and their stories with us. I was really moved and inspired. So I hope our attendees were as well. So thanks everyone for being here, and enjoy the rest of your evening.